Okay, so here we are in Procreate, and we already know the layers window is on the upper right here. And much like Krita, Procreate wants you to draw on a separate layer, not the background layer. In fact, if you click on the background layer, Procreate will just prompt you to pick a color for that background, which we can just do here, hit done, and it automatically kicks me back up to layer 1. And then of course on layer 1, I could just pick a brush, make some brush strokes, go back into my layers, and we can see the icon layer 1 has been updated with my brush strokes. If I hide the layer by clicking its checkbox on the right, it obviously gets hidden. I can bring it back the same way by checking it on. If I hide the background, we can see that the layers in Procreate are also transparent, just like they are in Photoshop and Krita. And Procreate uses a checkerboard similar to Photoshop. It's just a little darker in this app, but it's the same thing. Checkerboard denotes transparency. Okay, you see that little N on layer 1? If you click that N, this is where you get your blending modes. And I'm just sliding my finger here, and you can see that that layer is updating based on the blending mode I have selected. You can also just single click and pick it like this. So like any app, normal is the default. If you scroll up, you'll get darkening modes, like there's multiply right there. And then you have darken, color burn. These are all ways of darkening the image. And you can just play with them to see what works best for the particular application you need it for. Generally speaking, multiply is what you want though. And then if I scroll down, I have lightening modes. We looked at screen. In Photoshop, we looked at linear dodge. In Procreate, you'd use color dodge, or add is another good one. We'll actually use some of these when I do paintings in the next section. And here at the top, you have your opacity slider. Okay, click back on the layer to hide that menu. To make a new layer, simply click the plus button. And if you want to delete that layer, just drag it to the left and you'll access this delete button. To duplicate a layer, drag it to the left, hit duplicate. And let me just quickly draw something on it so you can see. And let me just rename this top layer by tapping the name and saying rename. I'll just call this layer 2. So yeah, if I want layer 1 to be in a group with layer 2, just click and hold layer 1 and drag it into layer 2, which creates a new group that you can hide and unhide in unison. I can collapse it down like this so it's nicer to the eye, or I can unfurl it like that and have access to all my layers. I could grab the move tool and move an entire group or scale an entire group, just like we could in Photoshop, clicking back on, say, the brush tool when I'm done. Okay, let's say I have something on a layer and I want to just clear it off. Well, remember I had that gesture control activated, so I could click and hold and say clear layer. Or if you don't want that gesture control, you can just go into the layer, click it, say clear. You can see where the gesture control just saves you a few clicks, right? All right, so let me just paint our little circle there. Let's say I want to lock the transparency of that, or alpha lock it. I'll open the layers tab, click on the layer and say alpha lock. You can see the layer icon has been updated there to show the transparency, indicating that the transparency information has been locked to what's currently on the layer. Then I can say select a different color and paint into our sphere. And I can effectively go ahead and render out our little sphere this way. And maybe make a new layer, click and hold the layer to drag it underneath layer 1. Grab a color, change my brush size here, and on that layer, I will just block in our little shadow here. And again, new layer, click and hold to drag it below, grab a brush, and start blocking in our background here. For this demo, by the way, I'm just using my finger, but when I actually go to paint something in the next chapter, I will use the Apple Pencil, which of course responds much better to pressure and angle and stuff like that. So anyway, now that we have our painting done on a few layers, I could like click that layer, click the selection tool, and have full access to dragging this around, rotating it here, scaling it. My sphere's a little warpy, so let me click warp and I'll warp it back into proper shape. And I'll just click on the brush when I'm done. Okay, so I want to add some more light to the sphere. Click the layer box, make a new layer. This time I'll click on the N button and set it to color dodge. Actually, let's go add. We haven't seen add mode yet. Click away, let me go into my air brushes. Here, soft brush, gonna set it to low opacity and high brush size, and here's the light side of the sphere. But you notice when I did that, if I show you my layers and turn this on and off, my painting has gone beyond the silhouette of the sphere and it's bled into the sky. And I don't want that to happen in this case. So there's two ways to fix it. One, I could use a clipping mask and clip this layer's transparency to the sphere below. To do that, simply click layer 4, click again, and say clipping mask. And just like we saw with Photoshop and Krita, it draws that little arrow indicating that its transparency is clipped to the circle below it. To undo a clipping mask, just uncheck it there. Now there's a second way I can do this. Like for example, let's say I had a layer in between the circle and my highlights. Now if I made a clipping mask, it doesn't work because it's clipped to a layer that doesn't even have any information on it in this case. So that's not gonna work for me. I'll push undo down here a couple times. So what I'm going to do is click on the circle layer, click again, and say select. This will make a selection shape that matches the circle that's on this layer. Now with that selection activated, I'll go back into my layers up to layer 4, click it, and click mask. This gives me a layer mask, which works exactly the same way we've seen in Photoshop and Krita. And when you make a layer mask with a selection already active, that's what it sets the layer mask to. So you can see my layer mask up there is that circle. So now if I just uncheck the selection tool and I'm back into painting mode and I click on layer 4, I can just grab any color and continue painting into that sphere without having to worry about it spilling over. I can of course take the eraser and erase out if I wanted. And one final thing I wanted to show you about layers in Procreate is how to import textures. And it's pretty simple. Go up to the wrench icon here. I'll click on insert a photo or insert a file if you have it saved to your files. So here I'm accessing my iPad's camera and I have these old photos from a YouTube video I did when I was doing some stop motion animation. Anyway, if this were a texture, I could just pick it. It comes in as its own layer, of course, which means I could, do all the same stuff I could do on any layer, including paint on it. But usually what you do with textures is you set it to, say, overlay mode. And look at that, I have a furry sphere. But those art supplies at the top of the photo are weird, so I'll just get an airbrush, or I should say an eraser tool set to the airbrush, and I can just erase that part out if I wanted. But now that that's gone, I don't have any texture there, right? So I want to clone the texture from below. That is up here on the left, on the second icon next to the wrench. Here's the clone tool, where you can basically copy and paste, but with a brush. Clicking on this little circle will set the clone source. So I want to copy this carpet texture and then just simply paint and you can copy it back in. But now my rug texture is overtaking the sky. So I'll do the same thing that I did before, where I take the circle layer, click it, say select, then go back into my layers up to the texture, click it again and say clipping mask. And there we go, a furry sphere. Okay, starting back with a fresh slate here, I want to show you something about color filling and layers. If I drew a circle, we've already seen that I can drag this in and color fill it. But that's assuming it's on the same layer. I'll undo that. Let's say I made a new layer and had the layer beneath the circle, and I wanted to fill the circle color in on that layer, which makes sense to keep your lines and your colors separate. So I'll just pick a new color, drag it in, and it doesn't do what I want it to do. It fills the whole canvas instead of just the circle. Let me undo that. This is where the reference function comes in. I'll click on layer 1, click on its icon, and we have this option at the bottom called reference. I'll check that. This tells Procreate to reference that layer when doing things like color filling. So now I can go back to layer 2, drag in my color, and we have the result we're looking for. I'll look at my layers here, and of course, I could hide my line layer and we just have the color fill. And you can see that color fill respects the texture of the pen brush I happen to use to draw those lines as well. Procreate fills it sort of right up to the edge of the line, which can sometimes be an issue. Sometimes you want to just go onto layer 2 here in this case and just paint in beyond the line just so you don't see any of those little errant white pixels. Now this feature is not perfect, unfortunately. If I go back to my layer 1 and I pick, say, like just a sketching pencil, and I'll pick a dark color and just draw another circle, that circle is clearly closed on all sides. But if I go back to layer 2 and try and color fill it, it doesn't work. This is what can happen sometimes with textured brushes like this pencil I just used, whereas the pen brush I used to draw my first circle, I guess had more opacity to it, and therefore Procreate regarded it as a closed shape. So to fill that second circle, I would actually use either just a paintbrush or I'd use selections. Okay, I think that's all for layers in Procreate. Let's do one final quick chapter where we talk about like effects and filters, because I haven't really touched on them at all yet, but it'll be fast and then we'll get right into doing actual paintings.